Frank Scarlett had every reason to be bitter. If you asked anyone in his small town, they'd tell you he was a good man, hardworking, honest, generous with his time. He was the kind of person who did things the right way. He believed in God, kept his promises, and treated people fairly. But life, it seemed, was determined to repay him with one loss after another. It all started the year his small construction business collapsed. It wasn't a market crash or a bad investment. It was a betrayal. A trusted partner, a friend, vanished with the company's funds, leaving Frank buried in a mountain of debt he couldn't possibly climb. He prayed desperately. He pleaded with God for help, for justice, for some sign of restoration. But his prayers seemed to hit a ceiling and fall back unanswered. Within months, the business he had built from the ground up with his own hands was gone. The sawdust and sweat, the early mornings and late nights, all of it turned to dust. The financial collapse was just the beginning. The strain of it all started to eat away at his marriage. The long nights spent staring at unpaid bills, the constant suffocating worry, and the unspoken resentment built a wall between him and the woman he loved. Conversations that were once filled with laughter and plans for the future became short and strained. The warmth in their home grew cold. Eventually, she packed her bags. Frank just stood in the doorway, watching her drive away, feeling as though a vital part of him had been ripped right out of his chest. And in that hollowed-out space, bitterness found a home. At first, it was just a whisper in the back of his mind. Asterisk, you didn't deserve this. You did everything right. Asterisk then, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Asterisk God saw all of this happen. He watched you lose everything, and he did nothing. Asterisk Frank kept going to church. He still bowed his head when it was time to pray, but his heart felt like stone. His prayers were no longer conversations of trust. They sounded more like arguments, like cross-examinations. He replayed every wrong, every unanswered prayer, every single crushing disappointment, until his resentment felt not just present, but completely justified. It became his constant companion, the lens through which he saw the world. One evening, after another long, empty day, Frank sat alone in his dimly lit living room. The silence in the house was deafening, amplifying his loneliness. He picked up his Bible from the side table, its leather cover worn from years of use. He just stared at it for a moment, then set it back down with a thud. "What's the point?" he muttered to the empty room. "I believed, I trusted, I did my part, and look where it got me." That night, sleep was a stranger. His mind became a battlefield where memories and anger wrestled relentlessly. He was trapped in a cycle of what-ifs and wimmies. Sometime in the fragile hours just before dawn, exhausted and hollow, Frank found himself on his knees. It wasn't an act of strength or piety. It was an act of complete and utter surrender. "I don't want to be like this," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I'm angry all the time. I don't even recognize myself anymore. If you're still there, God help me choose you. Because right now, bitterness feels so much easier. There was no lightning bolt from heaven, no sudden miracle that erased his pain. No instant fix, but in that quiet moment of surrender, something shifted. A tiny crack appeared in the armor of his bitterness. The next morning, Frank made a quiet decision. He couldn't control what had been taken from him: his business, his wife, his sense of security. But he could choose what would shape him moving forward. He could choose who he was going to become in the aftermath. From that day on, the battle began. Every single day, bitterness knocked on the door of his heart, inviting him back into its familiar, cold embrace. And every day, he had to consciously decide whether to let it in. He started small, with manageable steps. When the familiar tide of resentment began to rise, instead of pretending he was fine, he prayed honestly. He told God exactly how he felt, raw and unfiltered. When a flash of anger flared up, he forced himself to pause, to take a breath, instead of lashing out or simmering in the poison. He made himself thank God for one thing each day, even when gratitude felt forced and unnatural. Some days, that one thing was simply the strength to get out of bed and face another day. It wasn't easy. It felt like learning to walk again. Weeks slowly turned into months, and little by little, the practice of faith began to soften the sharp, jagged edges of his heart. He started to notice that he wasn't replaying the old wounds as often. The mental movies of betrayal and loss began to fade. He found himself listening more to people, judging less. He started volunteering at a local homeless shelter, not because he felt particularly strong or holy, but because serving others who were also in pain reminded him that he wasn't alone in his suffering. It connected him to a shared humanity he had forgotten. One afternoon at the shelter, Frank struck up a conversation with a man who had lost everything: his family, his home, his dignity. He was living on the streets. Yet, as they talked, the man smiled easily and spoke of God with a quiet, unshakable confidence that baffled Frank. On the drive home, the man's words echoed in his mind. A powerful conviction washed over him. If that man's faith can survive that kind of devastation, maybe mine can survive this, too. Healing didn't come by erasing the past or pretending the pain wasn't real. It came by choosing faith again and again. Sometimes it was a choice he had to make hourly. Bitterness promises protection. It promises to shield you from more pain, but in reality, it only delivers isolation. It builds a prison around your heart. Faith, on the other hand, doesn't promise a life without pain. It invites you to feel it, to walk through it, but it also offers a hand to hold. It offers peace even in the middle of the storm. Years later, Frank's life looked nothing like the one he had once imagined for himself. The business was never fully restored. His marriage didn't return. His heart. Frank Scarlett became known in his town not for what he had lost, but for how he loved afterward. He became a man who listened well, who understood pain without judgment. He forgave freely. He spoke with a gentle compassion, especially to those who were carrying their own silent anger and resentment. When people would ask him how he stayed so hopeful after everything he had been through, he never gave a polished, pre-packaged answer. He was always honest. He'd simply say, "I had a choice. I could let bitterness define me, or I could trust God to shape me. I chose faith, not just once, but every single day. And in that daily choice, in choosing faith over bitterness, Frank discovered a quiet, powerful truth. Life may break you, but faith can remake you. It can take the broken pieces and rebuild them into something stronger, softer, and more beautifully alive than before. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more content that explores faith, hope, and the power of the human spirit. We'll see you next time.